now.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Nice to see everybody here this morning. Can see Adele. Nice to see you, Adele, this morning. Nice to see you. I think even Robert Black has joined us. That's extraordinary. Good morning, Robert. Nice to see you. Michael Gross.
Good
Lovely.
morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to see you all. And family Baumfreund. Nice to see you as well. We meet in the street occasionally, but it's nice to meet in the screen as well. Very nice. Family Haas, also nice to see you. Good morning. Good morning. Nice to see everyone here. Getting together to learn a bit together on a Tuesday morning. So the topic really of this current series of shiurim is themes in Sefer Bereshis. And there are so many very fascinating themes here. I wanted to have a look a little bit at, we are all familiar with the major figures of Sefer Bereshis, right? Whether it's Noach or Avram or Yitzchak or Sarah or Rivka, we're all familiar with that. But there are some minor figures in Bereshis which deserve a bit of a closer look. And I was looking recently at the person who accompanied Avraham Avinu. The Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Avraham Avinu, Lech lecha, go. And it says, leave behind everything. Leave behind Ma'atzecha, Moladtecha, Beis Avicha, leave behind everything. Just go. Leave behind Aram Naharaim, Mesopotamia, and Ur-Kasdim, and go towards Eretz Yisrael. What's interesting is that Avram leaves behind nearly everybody. Suddenly it says that he brings with him Lot, his nephew. Just to remind you, Avram had a brother called Haran. We don't know much about Haran. In fact, we know almost nothing about Haran. But Haran had a son called Lot. So Lot is Avram's direct nephew. And suddenly the pasuk says, "Vayelech itay Lot." So Avram doesn't completely do exactly as he's instructed. This is an old Jewish custom that you don't do exactly what you're told to do. You do it almost exactly, but not exactly precisely. He was told to leave behind Beis Avicha, leave all your relatives behind. He takes with him a nephew. And that nephew actually was no end of trouble. Turned out to be a source of no end of trouble, right? Just to remind you, let's have a look at a few psukim. Let me see if I can get up here what I want to get up here. Second. Bear with me for a minute, ladies and gentlemen. Avram here, so it's chapter 12. Second. Okay, I'm going to share a screen. Let's see how we're doing with the screen. Okay, can you see a screen here? Gentlemen, yes, got it? Right, so the pasuk says, let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Right, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Avraham, Lech lecha, and tells him to leave behind. Can you see the top line? Vayem Hashem al Avram, Lech lecha, be'atzecha, moladtecha, beis avicha, el ha'oretz asher areka. Right, leave behind your also your father's house. Okay, so your father's house means all your relatives. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him a bracha, I will bless you, you'll be. And then it says, Vayelech Avram kasher diba elav Hashem. Avram goes as HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructed him. Vayelech ito Lot. Now here's an interesting thing. It doesn't actually say Vayikach ito Lot. It doesn't actually say that he took him. It just says that Lot went with him. Can you see this? It says Vayelech ito Lot. Lot goes with Avraham Avinu, seemingly of his own accord. In other words, Lot is not willing to be parted from his uncle. Okay, according to Chazal, his father had died, and Lot was, in that sense, an orphan. He knew that his uncle Avram was a great man. Okay, so the story proceeds. What then happens is, let's just go very, very briefly here. I'm going through the next chapters. So the next chapters tell us, right, that a fight breaks out. I'm just giving you a bit of background here before we get to the question here. The fight breaks out. Vayhi Riv. There's a quarrel between Avram's shepherds and Lot's shepherds. In other words, Lot becomes wealthy, and so does Avram. And the shepherds start quarreling with each other. And Avram says, look, Avram, Lot, I'll not to he mariva. Let there be no strife. Let's not fight. Let's go. Right? What achim? So it's interesting to know actually that the word achim, we tend to translate the word achim to mean brothers, but achim just really means family. Right? We are family. We are connected. Okay, and very often the word achim and achosi is used in the Tanakh to mean family. Right? It actually means a brotherhood, right? A connection. It's connected actually to one of the words for love, right? Ahava, achva, shalom bereyas. Achva, aleph chet, vav hey, means a brotherhood, means a friendship, means a love. And this is, we have a family bond, right? So Avram says to him, you go left or right, you can go wherever you like, and let's separate. It's actually interesting. The Mefarshim connect to this. Here's Avraham Avinu opening his house to welcome all comers, right? The Medrash says his house is open on all four sides, right? And on all four sides, people are coming in and guests, etc. And his one relative that he's got in the whole world, he doesn't have any relatives. No one's with it. His one relative that he's got who's accompanied him, he says to him, go. I don't want you here living anymore in this house because you are causing discord. You are causing internal friction. So Avram sends him away. Okay, we'll come 1 second. We'll come to. So Avram sends him away. And what does he do? Lot sees. What does he see? He sees Sodom. He sees Sodom and Amorah, which is a very fertile, wealthy land, right? And what does he do? And Lot chooses to go and live in Sodom, right? And he goes and lives in Sodom. And here the Torah gives us a reality check here. Anshe Sodom ro'im v'chatoim l'Hashem ma'od. And the people of Sodom are typified in a very radical way, right? As ro'im v'chatoim l'Hashem ma'od. Are we sharing the screen here? Did we get the share screen? Right? Anshe Sodom ro'im v'chatoim l'Hashem ma'od. The people of Sodom are very wicked. Chazal say ro'im describes their wickedness bein Adam lechavero in a social human sense, and chataim is bein Adam lemokom, right? So both in terms of the way they treated other people and in the way they related to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they were ro'im v'chataim, they were wicked, and not just wicked, but ma'od. They seem to have reached a new height in their wickedness, and Lot chooses to go there. And not only that, here, look at the next pasuk here. It says, "Hashem Omar Avram," HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Avram, "Acharei hipored Lot me'imo." HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Avram after Lot had left him, right? What do Chazal say on that? So if you have a look here, and the Mefarshim say, Rashi says, Acharei hipored Lot. Can you see this? Rashi says, Kol zaman sheharosha imoi Hoya hadibur poresh mimenu. So long as Lot was living in Avram's house, Avram didn't have the dibur. What is the dibur? The dibur here means the Ruach HaKodesh. He didn't have any Ruach HaKodesh. Why? Because the presence of Lot was so problematic from a spiritual point of view. Basically, Lot was a Rasha. And his presence in Avram's house actually made it impossible for Avram even to have a nevuah. That's what Rashi's saying here. Kol hazman she'arosha imo, so long as the Rasha was in his house, so he himself, Avram himself, was affected by it. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, after Avram, so it says, Hashem Amar Avram, Achrei Porelod Me'imo, after Lot departed from him, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him a bracha, as Kol Ha'oretz Asher, I'll give you this whole land, etc., etc. Okay, so just to summarize for one moment, Lot has come along, even though it seems to have been not plan A. Plan A was Lech Lecha, leave behind all your relatives. Lot seems to have been something of a plan B, right? That Avram takes Lot with him, beleis breira, he has no choice. He's not going to leave this orphaned nephew defenseless, so he takes him along. Sure enough, before long, in the next chapter, Lot is already causing trouble, both in terms of the fighting with the shepherds and in terms of his presence seems to be blocking Avraham Avinu's kedusha in the house. And when given a choice of where to go to, he chooses to live in Las Vegas. That's what he chooses to That's what he chooses to go to. He chooses to go and live in Sodom, right? In a place which is dedicated to Ro'im v'chatoim Lashem. So basically, the story of Lot is already complicated. But pay attention to the fact that the Torah goes to quite great length to spell out stage by stage what is happening to this man. So he can't be irrelevant to the story. It's true that he's a problem, but he can't be irrelevant. So the question is, what really is happening here? And now then the story gets even more strange. What happens then is, so that's chapter 13. So in chapter 14, there is the back. 1 second. Sharing screens. Let's share a screen. Chapter 14 is well known, is the battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, right? What happens is, and the Melech Sodom, and Sodom is caught up in this battle, this massive battle in the whole area, the 5 kings against the 4 kings. Kings here means sort of tribal leaders, right? There were all sorts of different warring tribes, and they were fighting with each other. And Sodom was one of those duchies, one of those areas, and he gets captured. What happens now? Vayovo hapolit, v'yoged la'avram ha'ivri. Somebody, an anonymous person comes. Lots of midrashim about who this was. Not my subject for the moment. Somebody hapolit, right? We use this word in modern Hebrew as well. Politim. Politim are, what are they? Are people who are immigrants, people who are
refugees.
Escaped. What do you say? Refugees. Thank you very much. Yes, the exact word. The politim are refugees. So here it says hapalit. Whoops. Right here, this word hapalit is a refugee. In other words, somebody escaped from the battle, and what happened? And he came and he told. Second, right? And he goes and he tells Avram. What does he tell Avram? He tells him, your nephew is now a prisoner of war. And now comes probably the strangest passage, which I'd like to look at, think about for a moment. What happens is, Vayishma Avram, ki nishba ochiv. And Avram hears that his relative has been taken captive. But let's remember for a second who this relative is. The relative is somebody who came along with him without being invited, was not part of the plan. He's the man who caused trouble and fight with the shepherds. He's the fellow who actually is such a Rosha that he prevents Avraham Avinu having Nevuah. He's a person, when given half a chance, leaves Avram's house and prefers to live in Sodom, which was the den of iniquity, was Ro'im v'chatoim Lashem ba'id, and he's now taken prisoner. What happens? Vayorik es chanicha v'yelidei beisa. Look at this highlighted text. What does he do? He mobilizes all his followers, right? And 318 people, and he goes into battle. Into battle against whom? Into battle against the 4 kings who have just finished conquering the 5 kings. In other words, these 4 kings are the most powerful tribal chieftains in the whole area, and Avram chooses to go into battle against them, even though he's completely outnumbered. Avram is not a warrior. He's not a fighter. We don't know of any battles that he's been involved in before this. Avram is over 75 years old, because at the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha he's already 75 years old. He's been promised by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I want you to appreciate the problem here in this text. Avram has been promised, your children will be great, will be the father of a great nation, you have a great future, you are going to be a bracha v'nivruchu v'chol kol mishpachos ha'adama, the whole of mankind will be blessed through you and your descendants, right? Go and live in Eretz Yisrael, and I will look after you, etc., etc. Avram accepts the bracha, accepts the mission, accepts his destiny, and what's he doing now? He's risking everything. He's risking everything to save whom? Who's he going to save? He's going to save his nephew, who is, to put it mildly, a real lobus, right? Somebody who has basically rejected him completely. Somebody who says to him, you know what, I don't fancy living with you, with Avraham Avinu, if you like. I don't fancy living in Yerushalayim. I fancy living in Sodom, in the den of iniquity. I think I might have mentioned it to you once. It just remains in my mind. I was once on vacation with my kids, and we went to an area next to the Yam HaMelech. Did I mention this? I took a photo. Do you remember I took a photo of this? I took a photo of a signpost. Now, you know, in Israel, signposts are sometimes quite fascinating. The names of streets, the names of shchunot, all got, I think Rabbi Wein once gave a whole series about the names of different areas and streets, etc. But we went to Ein Gedi, right? So Ein Gedi is a lovely little tiyul next to the Dead Sea. And when you come down from Ein Gedi, you come down to the road. There's only one main road, as you know, going alongside the Dead Sea, right? And as we're coming down, we're coming to a junction, and suddenly I stopped the car and I said, give me the camera, I've got to take a picture of this road sign. So the kid said, what are you doing? So he said, look at this road sign. The road sign said, Yerushalayim to the left, Sodom to the right. That was the road sign. And I thought to myself, if there was ever in life a sort of an existential road sign which really expressed some of the big decisions a person has to make in life. Are you going? It's like the Kohen Gadol deciding between La Shem and La Azazel, right? That decision, that black and white decision. Are you going to Yerushalayim or are you going to Sodom? So Lot had that decision to make, made the wrong decision. Okay, he then got caught up in a battle and he's now a prisoner of war. So what? Why is Avraham Avinu going out and risking everything? He's risking his whole life. He's outnumbered and outgunned, and he's going into battle against the most fiercest warriors. This is a key question, a key question in the whole story. And the question really revolves around, what is the Torah telling us this story? Why are we interested in Lot? There must be something here. There must be something here of interest, which was worth it for Avraham Avinu to take Lot with him in the first place, and also was worth it for him to risk his life and risk his future and risk all his followers to save Lot. So this is a very fascinating, very fascinating theme. And let me give you a couple of different answers here to this question. So one of the answers is interesting. The reason why I've chosen this question is because I'm interested in themes in Sefer Bereshis, and this question is a mafteach, is a key. You very often find when you're learning Gemara, and certainly learning Tanakh as well, that in many topics, there is one question which is the mafteach, which is the key to opening up the whole subject and seeing it from a deeper perspective. So here I want to give you two different answers to this question. One of them is contained in a Rashi. That Rashi here says, and the first answer I'm giving you is the answer of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in Sefer Emes Yaakov. So he says the following idea. He says, one second. So he says, on this pasuk, when Avram says to Lot, you know, haloi kol haaretz lefanecha, hiparid no mo'olai, let's separate our ways, im hasmol ve'emina, v'im hayomin ve'asmeila, which is a very poetic way of saying, if you go right, I'll go left. If you go left, I'll go right. In other words, why does he go to such great lengths? So there's a Rashi here, an interesting Rashi. So Rashi here says, look at this language of Rashi, and this is what is quoted by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, that when Avram said goodbye to Lot, he shook his hand. In his heart, he wasn't sad to see him go, because Lot was clearly a bad influence, and clearly his heart was in the wrong place, and witnessed the fact that he found Sodom, the worst spiritual place in the country. He found that irresistible. Nevertheless, Avram says to him, look at this highlighted text here, B'chol asher teshev, wherever you decide to live, can you see the highlighted text here? Lo esrachek mimcha, I won't be far away. Ve'emod l'chol l'mogen u'le'ezer, I will always be there for you. L'mogen, mogen means a protection, and an ezer means a support. I'll always be there, basically saying to him, goodbye, wherever you want to go to, you go there. If you need me, I'm there to help you. That's what Avram says. And guess what, says Rashi? And Rashi ends up saying, V'seif dava hutzrach, and indeed, Lot did need him eventually. Shenema yishma Avram kenishba achiv. As it says that Avram heard that he'd been taken prisoner and he went to help him. Says Rabbi Kamenetsky something very interesting. He says, this is fundamental to the whole of Sefer Bereshis. That's why I say it's a mafteach. So he says, if you look at Chazal, tell us that there are many reasons why Sefer Bereshis is written. Just remember for a second, this is Parsha Shavua. This week's Parsha, it's Parsha's Boy. And in Parsha's Boy is Shemos chapter 12, which starts with the words, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodashim. Okay? Now, what is special about chapter 12 is that it's the beginning of the halachic material of the Chumash, right? Until Shemos chapter 12, it's all narrative. It's just stories. The very first Rashi on the first pasuk in Bereshis asks the question, why do we need all these stories? Why didn't the Torah start from Parshas Bo? If you have a look at the very first Rashi on Bereshis Bara Elokim Es Hashemayim V'Haaretz, says Rashi, why did we need Sefer Bereshis? Right? We could have, if the Torah is a book of rules, of halachas, about how to live as a Jew, it should have started off with Parshas Bo, HaChodesh Zeh Rosh Chodashim, which teaches us about Pesach, teaches us about Bris Milah, teaches us about Pidyon Haben, Kaddish Li Kol B'chor, teaches us about Tefillin, teaches us about Pesach, Matzah, and Moro, and V'higadu to Levincha, Seder night. All these halachas are in this week's Parsha, in Parshas Bo. Before this, we have no halachas at all. Right? It's true, Avram does a Bris Milah, but there's no halachic material in the Torah before Shemos chapter 12. So there's several answers to this question. Rashi's got his answer, but Yaakov Kamenetsky is interested in a different answer, which I think is interesting to us as well, because he brings down, Chazal say, that the whole of Sefer Bereshis is there for what reason? So this is the phrase, which I'm sure you've heard before, Derech Eretz Kodmo La Torah. Derech Eretz Kodmo LaTorah. The word Derech Eretz has multiple meanings, right? I'm discussing this at the moment in a different shir that I'm giving. One or two of you have participated in it. I'm giving a shir at the moment about Samson Raphael Hirsch and what does he mean by Torah in Derech Eretz. But the word Derech Eretz means different things in different contexts, right? Sometimes it means having a parnasa, right? Having a worldly occupation. But here it means, for Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Derech Eretz Kodmo LaTorah means morality, moral values, right? And moral principles. Seeing the Ovos living a life of morality and integrity and in a way which illustrates to us how to live a life properly, that is Kodmo LaTorah. In a sense, before you actually can engage in Torah and mitzvahs is, if you like, Koma Bet. It's the second floor. The ground floor is to live like a mensch, to have integrity. I remember there's a phrase that is sometimes used among Rabbonim and Dayanim about what is the fifth chelek of Shulchan Aruch. Right, the Shulchan Aruch is written in 4 chalakim. Right, Orach Chaim, Even Ezer, Yerodea, Choshen Mishpat are the 4 volumes of Shulchan Aruch, and there is a phrase sometimes the fifth chelek of Shulchan Aruch is common sense and integrity and derech eretz, to know, to use your mind and to use your moral compass to know what is morally correct. But I remember that my Rebbe, Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, often got a little bit annoyed when people said, this is the fifth chelek of Shulchan Aruch. And he would say regularly, no, you're wrong. This is the first chelek of the Shulchan Aruch. This is not the fifth chelek of Shulchan Aruch. Shlomo Zalman used to say the first volume of the Shulchan Aruch is normality and seichel and derech eretz and moral values. That's the first chelek, right? And then you can learn the other 4, right? What was he referring to? Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zeichat Tzaddik Livracha, one of the most unique people I've ever met in my life. He changed my life completely, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So what does he mean? He means what Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky is talking about here on this question. He's saying, why is Avraham Avinu risking everything to go and save this Lobos, right, of Lot, who had run away from him to Sodom? Why is he risking everything? So Rabbi Kamenetsky, he gave his word. He promised him. Wherever you go, I will be L'moged L'ezer. I'll be there if you need me. If you've given your word, you keep your word. That's really what Sefer Bereshis is all about, says Rabbi Kamenetsky. It's about, and there is actually a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Kaf Zayin, Kaf Ches, I think it is, which refers to Bereshis as Sefer HaYoshar. Sefer HaYoshar, Yud Shin Reish, the book of Yashrus. Why? Because the Ovos, says the Gemara, were Yesharim, right? So Yashrus is unfortunately a quality which is not quite so common as maybe it should be, right? Integrity, reliability, honesty, right? Says Rabbi Kamenetsky, Avram given his promise, so that's a no-brainer. That's something he has to, even if it means he puts himself in danger, and even if he's risking the whole destiny of Am Yisrael. But it doesn't matter, because that's really what is required of him. That is a mitzvah. And actually, it's interesting, we all know that Avraham had 10 nisyonos, 10 tests of his spiritual and moral fiber. One of the tests is the battle against the 4 kings to free Sodom. So what's the test there? What is the test? Is the test to see how good of a warrior he is? So I think the pshat there is that this is his test. His test was to see, did he understand that having given his word, that was something which had to be kept irrespective of everything else. So here we find an amazing thing, that Avraham Avinu so I think this is one of the important themes. If we think about themes in Sefer Bereshis, one of the important themes is to look for and understand moments in Sefer Bereshis where we are being told moral values. right? If you read the books of ethics, I remember Rabbi Sachs, Zechron Levracha, as was his custom, when he discussed these things, he started quoting all the different moral philosophers and ethical works, all the way back from Plato, all the way through to modern times. But I remember he once gave a talk on something similar to this, and he says, actually, the philosophers of morality and ethics all agree that morality and ethics begin with keeping your word. That's Kita Aleph. That's Kita Aleph of morality. If you give your word and you keep your word, then you can start building a moral society. If people don't keep their word, then you haven't even got to Kita Aleph. You haven't even got to the first level of what it means to build. So a moral society has got all sorts of different levels to it, caring for the poor and doing all sorts of things and charity, there are all sorts of levels of morality. But Kita Aleph is you give your word, you then keep your word. If you keep your word, then we have already a deal. That's incidentally why we have the minhag before a person goes under the chuppah. He goes under the chuppah and puts the ring on the finger of his beloved, of the color. Before he does that, the minhag is to have a vort. What is a vort? A vort is where you give your word. The chassan is giving his word. He's promising. I intend to marry this young lady at a date to be arranged between us. Does she agree? Yes, she does. That's it. What have we done here? That's not chuppah. That's not kiddushin. That's not a halachic process at all. Why do we do that? The answer is to build a home. A home is built on trust. Trust begins when someone gives his word and keeps his word, and that's Kita Aleph. So the beginning of a marriage is a vort. It's not actually a chuppah. The beginning of the marriage starts when somebody gives their word and keeps it. Here is Avram Avinu gave his word to Lot, who was really a rebel, and he was a lobus, but he gave him his word. That word had to be kept, come what may, and that is part of Derech Eretz Kodmo Atera. And I think that's a very fascinating theme in Sefer Bereshis. But now I'd like to move on to a second answer to this question. So we asked a question, why is Avram risking everything to save Lot? And the answer is to understand the importance of Avram as a dugma ishit, right? He is a personal example of someone living a moral life of integrity and keeping his word. Okay, so that is one answer. However, the Malbim has a different answer to this. Malbim has a different answer. For that, we need to look a little bit more at the future of Lot. I'm pretty sure most of you know. So what eventually happens? Sodom is Sodom gets destroyed, as we all know, and Lot gets saved. Okay, so the beginning of Vayera, what happens at the beginning of Vayera? Fast forwarding here a little bit. Beginning of Vayera. Right, second. I didn't manage to cut and paste and make a document out of it, so you'll just have to be patient with me for 1 second. Avram does the bris milah, the end of Lech Lecha, and the beginning of Vayera. The Malachim come and they say that that Yitzchak will be born, and then they go. After they go, it says the Akumu Mishamu Anoshim. The Anoshim here are the Malachim, the 3 Malachim. Vayashkifu al Pnei Sodom, and then they turn towards Sodom. Avram holich imam l'shalcham, and Avram goes with him, and he suddenly realizes what's going to happen. That they're about to destroy Sodom. So here's the famous tefillah of Avram Avinu. He starts davening for Sodom. That's not my topic for this morning. Time is a bit short. What happens is that the Vayavo Shnei Malachim Sodoma Ba'erev, they come in the evening to Sodom, the whole story. And what happens is that the whole of Sodom, that only Lot is saved. They try and save his wife as well, but she looks back as she shouldn't have. So who have we got when they're fleeing from Sodom? The answer is he's got 2 daughters, so he tries to convince his sons-in-law, right? He speaks to his sons-in-law. And he says, we must get out of here quickly. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is about to destroy the city. He says, the Pasuk, his sons-in-law were real citizens of Sodom. They didn't believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They didn't believe in morality. They thought the whole thing was a mitzachek. Yeah, the whole thing was a joke. They thought it was a joke. So what happens is, right? It says, don't look behind you, right? What happens is, Vayafach is Arim Ho'el, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu annihilates the whole city, the whole town, the whole area, right? Everything gets destroyed, right? Everything is destroyed. And here the pasuk says, "Vayhi b'shachis elakim es ari akikar." Now look at this pasuk here, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroys these cities. Vayizkor Elohim es Avram. HaKadosh Baruch Hu remembers his promises to Avram, and what does he do? Vayishalach es Lot mitoch hafecha. Lot is saved, right? And who is he saved with? With Vayal Lot mitzah vayeshev b'hor shtei benos of imo. He and his two daughters are the only survivors of the whole area. Okay? So again, we find we've got a similar, it's worth paying attention again, a similar detail to what I mentioned earlier, and that is, if Lot is really such a Rasha, and he's really plan B, and he just attached himself to Avram, and then he rejected him, and he went to Sodom, and everything, why are we given such a lot of details about Lot and what happened? Who cares about Lot and what happens to him? And here we are at a certain point where Lot is now hiding in a cave, and all around him the world has been totally wiped out, right? And he's with his two daughters. Now we know what the continuation of the story is. The continuation of the story is also a very, very strange topic in the Chumash. What happens is, right? So they were under the impression that not only, it's difficult for us to imagine today because we have a consciousness of the whole globe and different countries, and we know minute by minute what's happening everywhere. But in the ancient world, if you lived on this side of the mountain, you actually had no idea what was happening on the other side of the mountain, and you didn't know what was happening. As far as they were concerned, the world had been destroyed. They didn't think that anybody they saw that nobody survived this earthquake and this terrible destruction. So the two daughters say to each other, we have no choice. We have no choice. Look at Pasuk 32. Let's make our father drink. Let's make him drunk and sleep with him and become pregnant from him. So what happens is they both commit. They make Lot drunk, and they both commit incest with their father. Okay, so again we have a story of Lot, which I think you'll agree with me is not a story to write home about. Okay, this is not a great zechus. Here, Lot attaches himself, abandons, goes to Sodom, gets captured, gets saved, gets again saved, schlepped out, and now he is fathering his own grandchildren, right? He's now sleeping with his daughters to create grandchildren. What happens is, both his daughters conceive from sleeping with their father, right? The oldest one has a child, a boy, and she calls him Moav. What does Moav mean, ladies and gentlemen? Moav means, what does Av? Av means the father. Moav means from my father. In other words, this is a child, the woman, the daughter, whose name we don't know, calls her son, this child was born from my father, not from my husband, but from my father. And that's Moav, right? Hu avi Moav Ad hayom hazeh. And he then becomes the father of a nation called Moab. And then the younger one, Vatseira Ganhi Yolda Ben, Vatikra Shemo Ben Ami, Q Avi B'nei Ammon. So here we have two children born from incest. One is called Ammon and one is called Moab. And they become then two big nations in the whole area. The Ammonites and the Moabites become massive nations. So Lot, in the most extraordinary and the most, one might say, in a sense, almost disgusting way, fathers two nations, Ammon and Moab, right? And therefore the story of Lot becomes even more complicated, right? From the beginning, I've tried to trace with you very briefly, I've tried to do this all in one share, to trace with you briefly all the stops along the way of Lot, and each one of them gets more and more strange. Right? It's strange that he came along in the first place. It's strange that he leaves Avram's house. It's strange that he chooses to live in a place which is a den of iniquity. It's strange that later on he ends up sleeping with his daughters and fathering children out of incest. And all that is recorded in great detail in the Chumash, right? Now you must understand, when the Chumash records something in detail, it must be significant. There were hundreds of other things. I'm sure Avram Avinu had lots of other followers, and some of them left him, and some of them stayed with him, and some of them went on to do A, B, and C. We have no idea. We know very little, actually. We don't know much about Avram Avinu either. We're not given much details about how he looked and where he went and what he did and his life. We're given only very sketchy details, and yet the Torah spends dozens of psukim telling us the exploits of this strange man, Lot. Right? But does the name Moab ring a bell? So the name Moab rings a bell. Why does the name Moab ring a bell? And here comes the Medrash, right? There's a Medrash, the Pasuk says, in a place in the Tanakh, Motzasi es David Avdi. I found David, my servant, right? Say Chazal, where did Avram find David? Motzasi often means, a Matzia means something that you found that you didn't expect to find. Something which is found, which is a Matzia in the street. A Matzia, we tend to use the word Matzia to mean a bargain. Right? You found a matzia, you bought a matzia. But that is the Yiddish colloquial use of the word matzia. A matzia really means in Hebrew, it means Eila matzia shalai, something that you find in the street unexpectedly. Something which you find which you had no right to find there, which just popped out in the most unexpected place. You're walking in the street and there's a 200 shekel note lying on the floor. It's a matzia. It's something that you found. Unexpected, you don't know where it came from. How did it happen? That is the concept of a matzia, of something which is found ownerless, right? So Chazal say, where did we find David? Motzati b'Sodom. David was found in Sodom. What is the connection? So now I'm open. You can unmute yourself to answer this question. What's the connection between David HaMelech and Sodom and Lot? Any offers?
He comes from Moab, David HaMelech.
David HaMelech comes from Moab, from Rus HaMoaviyah, right? Ruth, the Moabite, right? She converts and marries Boaz, and she has one child and one child only, right? And from that child comes a dynasty, eventually David HaMelech, right? This is, in fact, the whole of Megillas Rus leads up to the closing half a dozen psukim of the book of Rus is about the genealogy of David HaMelech, right? And Rus is a descendant of Moab, and she gives birth to eventually Yishai and David, and David has the power. David has a tremendous spiritual power in Jewish history, not just the power to write the Tehillim, which is the greatest spiritual tefillas ever written, but David has the power ultimately, as Tzemach David Avdecha Meira Tatzmiach, Bakano Torah Bishur Secha, we daven every day, right? That David is the trigger to bring about the ultimate redemption for mankind. The Geula comes through David HaMelech. And who is David HaMelech? A descendant of Moab. Says the Malbim, right? Let's now rewind this Shia to its very beginning. We started off this Shia by looking at the Psukim at the beginning of Lech Lecha. Beginning of Lech Lecha, Avram is told, leave your family, leave all your relatives, Lech Lecha me'atzcha, mimoladcha, me'beis avicha, and go. And what happens is, he agrees to take with him Lot. Says the Malbim, Avram had a nevuah, he had Ruach HaKodesh, and he knew that even though Lot clearly in his own personal life was going to go what we might call today off the derech, he was going to be somebody who did not join the main body of Klal Yisrael. He wasn't going to be a descendant of Avraham Avinu. He wasn't going to be a friend of Yitzchak or of Yaakov. He wasn't going to follow the same path. He was going to go down a terrible path. Ro'im v'chatoim l'Hashem ma'id. Nevertheless, Lot contained within him a spark. And that spark was the Shoresh of Mashiach. And there is here, says the Malbim, a most extraordinary idea in the Torah. So the Torah is giving us, if you like, in Sefer Bereshis, two different narratives. One is a mainstream narrative. Avram and Sarah eventually give birth to Yitzchak. Yitzchak and Rivka give birth to Yaakov. Yaakov has his 12 children. They become the Gar'in, right, the basis of Am Yisrael. That's the mainstream narrative. That's 90% of the text. There is, however, a subsidiary little stream flowing alongside of this main river, and that is Lot. The spark of Lot is that despite the way that he lived, the decisions that he made, he contained within him the potential to have a descendant through the most strangest circumstances. Don't forget, Moab is born through incest, right? Nevertheless, right, within the strangest, darkest areas of mankind, there is still a spark of Kedusha that can grow out and eventually find its manifestation in someone like Rus, right, Ruth HaMoaviyah, and she then becomes the Aim Shel Malchus. She becomes the ancestress of David HaMelech and Malchus Beis David, and that is one of the primary forces for the ultimate Geula. So Avraham Avinu must have known, right? So we asked a question. Let's review for a moment. We asked the question: what does Avram think he's doing, risking everything to go into battle, where he himself is not trained in battle, and he's only got 318 followers against probably thousands of these four kings with all their warrior tribes? He's outgunned. He relies on miracles to go into battle, just to do what? To save Lot. To save Lot. And who is Lot? Lot is a no-goodnik. Lot is somebody who's rejected him. Avram knew that for all his external negativity, within Lot there is a spark of the Geula Acharona. He saw that within him there was a spark of pure Kedusha which would surface generations later on. And he had to save him because he contained something so precious. And that's why Avram goes into battle to save Lot. It's a different answer to Rabbi Kamenetsky. Rabbi Kamenetsky's answer is he went to save Lot because he'd given his word, and he's a man of his word, because it's Derech Eretz Kodma LaTorah. Both of these answers are true. But and why are they interesting? Because they both touch on what is Sefer Bereshis all about. Rabbi Kamenetsky views Sefer Bereshis as being a lesson in morality and in spiritual personalities of Chesed, etc. But the Malbim sees that within Sefer Bereshis there is, if you like, the DNA, the basic information for the whole future of Klal Yisrael. Ma'aseh Avos Siman Labani means within Sefer Bereshis everything is there, right? And if everything is there, it must be that the ultimate Geula is also there. Only the ultimate Geula goes by a different route. it gets to the same destination eventually, but it goes through a life of averus, a life of immorality, a life of promiscuity, and even within those people, there is still a spark, right? There's a spark of Kedusha, which is worth saving despite everything. And therefore, the Torah gives us such a lot of details about, Lord, why are we interested? A man commits incest with his sisters, with his daughters. That's not something I want to read about. Why do I want to read about that? Who's interested in? And they have children, Ammon and Moab. Who's interested in all that? No. There is something here in this man, something which is irreducibly significant, something which will definitely help Klal Yisrael. And it's one of the interesting and strangest stories in the whole of the Chumash, how Malchus Beis David is eventually finds its way. And it's a question to which I don't really have a great answer. Lots of them are fortunate. Barbanel talks about it, the Malbim speaks about it. Why is it? I'm leaving you with this question, but it is an interesting question. Why is it really that the ultimate David HaMelech is a product of these strange people, of people who haven't lived the greatest lives, who haven't done the greatest things, who are not great tzaddikim and great ma'aminim, people who've spent their life in Sodom, who have given birth through incest. And nevertheless, what they produced is the ultimate Geula. So there are various different attempts to answer this question, but I think the question is more interesting than the answer, because the question tells you that within Sefer Bereshis, alongside the mainstream narrative of how Klal Yisrael evolved and emerged from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Yosef, and his brothers, there is this other little trickle of a story, which at the moment it's like a river still running underground. We still don't know that it's got any significance at all. But it must have some significance, otherwise why is the Torah telling us all this? And the significance is it surfaces in Megillas Rus. Suddenly Megillas Rus is a moment of aha. Now we know why we were told all these things about Lot and his daughters and Moav. Suddenly in Moav there is something of unbelievable significance. Reminds me actually of a story I once read about a big family in America, a big Choshev family from, I think they were from Hungary, and they had lots of cousins and relators, and they were very important in the community. And at one point, the grandfather was telling the story about how did this family survive the Holocaust? How did they come out of the Holocaust? So he says, we're talking about the early 20th century, around about just before, I think, the First World War. So life was very tumultuous for the Jews in Central Europe at the time, and lots of the, there was communism, and there was all sorts of atheism, and various assimilation was rife in Central Europe, in Western Europe, Central Europe, wherever. And but there was a family there of about half a dozen children, and they were Talmidei Chachamim, and they were important kids. But one of the boys went off the derech. One of the boys abandoned Yiddishkeit, and he abandoned the family. And eventually, in the 1920s, he decided he's going to go to America, the Golden Medina, and he's going to forget about Yiddishkeit. And he did marry a Jewish girl, apparently, but that was just by chance. And he sets up a family, a completely non-from Treifa family in America. And he is a businessman, he makes a lot of money. At a certain point in the early 30s, he realizes what's going to happen with the Nazis. And he makes a trip back to Europe, and he arranges for the whole family to leave Europe. And he pays for it, and he finances it, and he organizes all his brothers and sisters and nephews and uncles and the whole family, and he is the catalyst that the whole family gets out of Europe and gets to America intact, right? Because he has the money and he has the contacts and he has the power to organize it. So what happens? So this grandfather is telling the story of the family, and he says, looking back on our family, that all our friends and relatives in Hungary, Nebuch, were all deported and massacred by the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, right? They were all victims of the Holocaust. We survived through the most unlikely member of our family to be in a sense, the savior. The savior of our family was this one uncle of ours, right? Who was the guy, right? He was the light. He was the one who went to live in Sodom. He was the one who rejected the Haim. He rejected everything we believed in, and yet he was actually able to do something that no one else was able to do. And I think the limud here is very interesting. And often you see people who abandon Yiddishkeit, and anybody who abandons Yiddishkeit is indeed a great sadness at one level. But at another level, the Torah tells us, remember the story of Lot. Remember what happened to Lot, that even within this man who appeared to be a negative person, there was an extremely important spiritual potential within him in a later generation, some way down the line, to be able to relate to every individual, that they have within them this spark of positivity. And that's what the Malbim here says about Avram. So I just wanted to share with you this idea, which I find for me is a very precious idea. That the story of Lot is the story how, in a sense, the redemption for Klal Yisrael comes in the most unlikely places. In the most unlikely places. I personally have also used this story a few times in conversations with some of my more Haredi or Yeshivish friends who speak very negatively about Medinat Yisrael and about the people who founded Medinat Yisrael, or the people who are running Medinat Yisrael. How can you possibly think of the return to Eretz Yisrael as something spiritually positive when the people who orchestrated it and who led it are people who are Machal Shabbos and who are not Sherma Mitzvahs and are people who are against, who don't believe in HaKadosh Baruch? How can you possibly accept, right, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael and the tremendous significance which I believe is there in our return to Eretz Yisrael in the 20th century? How can you possibly think that it's something of Kedusha, right, when the leaders were so distant from Emunah and from Torah and Mitzvahs? How can you possibly think that? To which, on a few occasions, I've said to them, let's discuss for a minute the story of Lot. Let's discuss the story of Lot. The story of Lot is the answer to this question. Lot is somebody who is a Sodom citizen, who has incest with his daughters, albeit unwittingly. He didn't do it purposely. But within him, in the most unlikely way, David HaMelech is born and the Geula is born. And therefore, obviously the Torah requires of us to live a life of Emunah and Yashrus and Yerushalayim, etc. But if there are people who go off the derech, always remember that within them there is a spark, there's a nitzites, there's a spark of potential, which maybe you can't see at the moment, maybe you won't even see in them their whole life, but from them could possibly grow out something positive, and therefore the story of Lot is, I think, an inspiration to all of us, and I wanted to share that with you this morning, and I can see already that the shir has come to an end. I hope you've enjoyed the little tour that you've had this morning through all these different stages along the way, but I think this is a theme worth highlighting with its modern significance, and it's both the Malbim and Rabbi Kamenetsky both make very profound points about the whole of Sefer Bereshis and its message to us, and that's it for this morning.